Hey everyone, it's Alex, and we're going to be talking about 5 of the best Arishem decks thus far in Marvel Snap. We're going to be talking about an insane, ridiculous counter deck as well, which is the #1 deck in the game right now. Believe it or not, would you believe that people are playing Arishem nonstop? But if you counter Arishem, you're going to climb with fervor. These 5 decks are going to be utilizing untapped-based statistics. It's only been a couple days, but I know this card is so new and so interesting, and people are really trying to get a better understanding of what's performing and what isn't. It's also worth noting that things could change rather rapidly statistically for cards like Arishem and cards that tend to upend the meta very quickly. It's currently running a 52.3% win rate and a 0.11 cube rate. Now, the cube rate in particular is very low. It is not in the range that we would generally recommend, but as the decks are perfected, ironed out, then what you get is a natural drift upwards for those high performing decks with Arishem as the testing gets resolved. This card is far from being figured out, and I mean, one could argue that it'll never be figured out given the RNG factors it has, but that doesn't stop us from talking about the top decks so far, so let's dive right in. So right off the top here, we're going to be talking about, there's a couple decks that have like very key components to them, and that's kind of what I've named them. This is Serashem, in the sense that it uses Sera to discount the cards so that you can kind of play very effectively with that extra energy, discounting both the cards that started in your deck and of course the cards that were added by Arishem after. This does not run Quinjet, which is fascinating because Quinjet would have had that double dip effect. Quinjet is being used in almost all the other decks and has proven to be a very notable card. Now, Sera is good here, but what you'll notice is this deck, despite having the hand generation of Agent Coulson and Nick Fury, is not running Loki. Now, this is actually a fascinating choice. Instead, it's running the Cersei. However, at the end of the day, you're going to just... This cube rate is actually better than many of the other decks, so I want to include it. Although it only has 290 games played, its cube rate at 0.21 is actually better than a lot of the ones we're seeing currently in the meta and in testing with Arishem. So is there something to be learned about Adam Warlock and Sera? I know you see Darkhawk in there, but Darkhawk is simply for the mirror matches because every game's a mirror match with Arishem right now, and so why not get a massive Darkhawk? So ultimately, this deck has something to say about using Sera to discount the entire hand. So anyways, a very interesting approach to Arishem, and one that ultimately took me by surprise from a cube rate perspective, despite having a relatively low win rate. Now, when we move on to, this is Sersishem, this one here is more about the Cersei side. The idea of taking that RNG that's being generated and perhaps flipping it into your favor. This one does run a Quinjet. Phastos is in this deck as well. Phastos getting some decent reviews from people that have been using it in Arishem, by the way. And Cersei, of course, is the linchpin card. You have a Loki as a backup plan if you start to generate all these cards with Snowguard and Agent Coulson. Absent from this deck is Nick Fury. However, you do have the addition of Mobius and Mobius. It's very notable that this deck is probably going to age a little better than some of the others, because you're going to say, hey, Alex, this is a 54% win rate and only a 0.10 or 10 cube rate. Well, that's because it's not running Darkhawk, which honestly, Darkhawk's only being run right now specifically for the state of the meta in the Arishem mirror matches. And if Arishem starts to fade, which is it's going to, it always does, the Darkhawk just splash will no longer make sense, right? So this deck may actually improve over time, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to include it, because it is a very stock traditional look at what we thought Arishem was going to look like, right? So anyways, this is a deck that I would keep an eye on because I bet it would perform better kind of in the future as the Darkhawk thing kind of settles in. Now, we also have Blinkshem. Now, this one here is very similar to the prior one, except it's running Blink. I talked about it on the Snapchat. I thought that Blink was a very interesting addition to these types of decks because you can play something, swap it out, and reach for a larger card. Now, you don't know what that's going to be. It could be a Red Hulk. It could be a Zola. Who knows what it is, but it's going to be a guaranteed higher costed card, which kind of allows you to pull through that very massive deck. Valentina, a very interesting choice here. I do think Valentina is an interesting choice, but I mean, I personally don't love it, but it is that hand generation, right? You get that hand generation with Loki. I totally get it, right? The wave is interesting because you only have a couple activators here. You have play wave, and hopefully you've drawn into Blob, Doctor Doom, or something else that Arishem might have generated. So this one here running a 55% win rate, but honestly a really low cube rate at 0.12. I think the key card here, which is proven to be better than in the prior deck, is going to be Legion. Legion has been a silent winner in these types of decks. The turn 4 ability to come out that completely change locations, and keep in mind, by turn 4, you know what all the locations are. Legion's been a silent winner. with Arishem. So if I think that card in and of itself is probably responsible for some of the additional cube rate here. And once again, this does not feature Darkhawk. I want to be sure to not feature some of these Darkhawk splashes because they are kind of flash in the pans. Now, that isn't to say that we're always not going to feature Darkhawk, because if we want to look at the statistically best decks, eventually we got to hit number 2, which is going to be Genshem, as I call it, which is basically that hand generation style play. As Coccia and I suggested on the Snapchat, you were going to have the prevalence of Arishem and hand generation in conjunction with Loki. In this deck, you have pretty much all of it. You have the Quinjet, you've got the Cable, you've got the Nick Fury, Agent Coulson, of course. Like, you're generating a lot of additional cards. It's kind of funny what you pull with Cable in the mirror matches because you're pulling random stuff half the time. Still running the tech of Shang-Chi, which I think is absolutely mandatory. Mockingbird's still good. Blob absolutely must have with Arishem. Blob has been absolutely tremendous. And at the end of the day, like, you can't argue with the quality of the cube rate here at 0.30, which is amongst the highest we're going to get. And it's at 2,000 games played, by the way. So this deck is performing very, very well. A bit of the secret sauce here is, of course, the addition of Darkhawk in the deck for the mirror matches, but Rogue, which is very notable. You can Rogue their Quinjet, right? Because of the mirror match, you Rogue the Quinjet. You can also Rogue their Darkhawk in the mirror match as well, which is absolutely wild. So that is the reason why you tend to like this. And if you ever go into a Magic-based game, you actually have 8 energy on turn 7, which is crazy because you get to play Darkhawk and Rogue together and potentially absolutely burst yourself forward. This deck doesn't actually run Magic, but a lot of people are. But anyways, so this is a 56% win rate, 0.30 cube rate, and this is probably one of the absolute best in the game right now. Now, there is an outlier. There is an outlier, and this is a current 61% win rate deck at a 0.38 cube rate at 200 game played, which is a very low threshold. So these numbers can change very rapidly, especially when I release a video like this and more people pick up on it. Now, the reason why I'm including this deck is you're saying, Alex, this almost looks exactly the same. What changed? Well, Professor X is in this deck. And it's interesting because in the matchup I had with Cozy in our 1v1 that he featured in his channel and I featured on mine, I actually was doing this lockdown Professor X style deck. And I was like, I think Professor X is actually really good with Arishem. And I had this idea, and it's actually being validated slightly with this particular deck. Now, will these statistics change as more people give it a shot? I'm sure. I don't think Professor X and the opportunity to draw Professor X at like less than 40% of all the games you play with Arishem are going to have this much of an impact on the performance, on the metrics. However, untapped-based statistics show that this is the #1 deck in Marvel Snap, running Arishem right now at a 61% win rate and 8.38 cube rate. Now, these numbers will go down 100%. I think it's a little higher than I expected, but I wanted to show you because this early on, this is what's performing. Now, let's say you're like, Alex, I just want to climb. I just want to climb. Show me that sweet counter deck, that meta counter deck, which is absolutely ridiculous right now because see that face? That is the face of a cold, like a stone cold climber. 61% win rate. The highest cube rate I have ever seen at 0.90. This is a 200 games played deck. So again, a little on the lower side, but it is a Kitty Pryde Athena deck that's running Darkhawk. It's running Darkhawk. So basically, if you want to counter them with Darkhawk. You have Sage. They're playing all this random garbage down, so Sage is going to feast. Darkhawk, Mystique. You have Mystique, Iron Man. It's just unbelievable how much power this puts out, but specifically against Arishem. They're like fumbling through their deck, and you're like, I'm in a Darkhawk Mystique. GG, noob. Like, what do they do? What do they do? And even if they have Shang-Chi in their deck, they're hoping to either generate it or they're hoping to pull it, again, 37% of the time or whatever it is. So your Darkhawk gets super chonky on turn 5. You Mystique it because you probably have initiative, and you get to play someone else too, right? While also buffing Athena, of course. So this deck is absolutely crushing the meta right now. So if you don't want to play Arishem and you just want to counter the crap out of Arishem, give this one a shot because right now it is absolutely demolishing with the highest cube rate I've ever seen in my Marvel Snap career thus far. Anyways, guys, I hope this video helped you. We're going to be doing the decks of the week as well in a few days, so we're going to get a little more statistics to see what's going on with other decks, Arishem, and of course, the meta as a whole. Thank you so much for watching. If you're not subscribed already, consider hitting that button. Hit the like button while you're there as well. Why not? And we'll see you on that next Marvel Snap video.